People will say, it's just so amazing that you're following your passion. But for me, this is less about pie making and more about having a creative outlet. I'm baking, I'm doing social media, I'm developing business relationships and collaborating with other small business owners. Sometimes things are not in your control and you have to be focused enough to not lose the thread. These are not just advertisements for the pies. I approach it as a way of storytelling about community connection, making art. Why do we have this mindset that when you scale up, you lose quality? I don't think we have to think that way.
We're going to talk about how Dini's Divine Pies came to be, how you guys operate. I have so many questions. So we're going to dig into that. But real quick, can you give us the quick rundown on your origin story? How did you get to opening Dini's Divine Pies?
It was all for love, Brien. I was fairly recently divorced. I was in a new relationship, and the guy that I was with loved key lime pie. And I thought, well, I'll make him one for his birthday. And he had actually told me a story about a prior girlfriend who had made him a key lime pie, and it wasn't so great. And that caused some friction between the two of them. So, I like a challenge, Brien. And I thought, well, I'm going to make him the best key lime pie he's ever had. And that's what I did. And it turned out that he loved it so much. I remember him saying, this is the best key lime pie I've ever had. There's a market for this. And I thought, that's crazy talk. He said, I'm going to prove it to you. And he took it to work the next day. And then his friends started asking me to make them key lime pies. That was in October of 2021. So that's kind of the real reason why I'm here making pie now, I guess. I'm not sure that I would have had the idea to start a pie business had it not been for that moment. The relationship didn't last. He's no longer here, but the pies are.
But the pies lasted.
Yes.
There you go. And my understanding is you were working full-time as a lawyer up until just a few years ago. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. I went to law school and mostly focused on public interest law. So I've done a lot of public defender work. I spent some years in private practice, but even in my private practice, I represented mostly low-income Latinos and working families in a variety of cases. And then most recently, I was a chief attorney for the Montgomery County, Maryland Legal Aid Office. So we did civil work in that particular office. But I do think it's relevant just because it helped me in the beginning to make sure that I was starting the business with all of the legal infrastructure and licensing requirements and things like that. So it was very helpful to have that skill set.
Sure. And then you went full-time with Dini's Divine Pies when?
That was in April of 2023. Is that right? Yeah, 2024. So it's been about a year and a half.
Okay.
April 2024. And, it's been an experience.
Yeah. So what I think, and I want to harp on that for just a second, because I think that's the hardest thing that any new entrepreneur deals with, especially presuming they have a full-time job while building their business on the side. At what point, or what was the catalyst moment for you when you're like, all right, I'm done with the day job, I'm going all in on this?
That's a great question. So in the beginning, after my then boyfriend shared these pies, friends and family started asking me for different kinds of pies. So I learned how to make different sorts of things. And then a few months later, I thought, well, it would be great to supplement my legal aid income with a little side, cottage food business. And then I approached a farmer's market and they weren't really open to it. So I went to this winery called Rockland's Farm Winery, which is in Poolesville, Maryland. And they said, come and give us 5 different pies that are your favorites. And, we'll let you know what we think, because I thought it would be a great place to have a pie stand. And I'd been there, a year before, and I loved the place. And so anyway, they invited me out and they tried the pies. And that day they said, we'll put you on the calendar. You can start on Mother's Day. That was 2023, is that, I think? 2022. That was Mother's Day 2022. And they said, just be prepared. You have to be fully licensed and making these pies out of a commercial kitchen, and be prepared to sell pies to about 500 people that day. And, I'm not a chef. I didn't grow up in the culinary world in any other than I waited tables forever. But you know what I mean? That wasn't my background. But the lawyering did help me get started on that. I established my LLC. I got the insurance I needed. You have to take a test in Montgomery County, Maryland, and in order to receive a food manager's certification. So I did that. I did all the things, and I was ready by Mother's Day, and that's where we officially launched.
Wow. Okay. So walk me through the initial growth of your baking company. What was it like to, so you got your LLC, you're ready to go, you got an order here, you got 500 pies you got to make. Was it just you? Did you have help right off the rip? What did the first handful of months
Hey,
look like?
man, it's such a blur right now, and I didn't actually answer your question about when I knew it was time to go in full time, and I can come back to that. But when I first started, I did have some help. I had friends who volunteered. I had a friend who was a chef, and she came in and helped me prepare for that first pop-up event, essentially. And, in those days, I knew so little about production, how you really have to make so many, whether it's pie or croissants or whatever, you really there has to be a strategy for it. You can't just really do it like you would at home. And so in those days, we were peeling apples by hand and cutting them. And I would buy these tiny key limes from the Latin grocery store, and we cut them and juice them. And, it was incredible. And the production then was very, very inefficient. So over time, I learned how to get better at that. And now we have it pretty much down to a science. But those early days the learning curve was very steep in all ways. Yeah.
So tell me about, are you a brick and mortar business? Do you have a storefront? Is
Yeah.
it pie bakery, or do you explain that for me? Where are you at with that now?
So, well, I did this part time. I basically used all of my vacation and holidays to do the work a couple times a week. A couple times a month, I would do a pop up at Rockland's Farm and a few others. And then when it just got to the point where people were asking me for more and more, I knew that it was time to resign from that position. And so I did have a small brick and mortar. It was a very tiny little space when I first launched a year and a half ago. And that it was great for a little while, but I outgrew the kitchen space I had there very quickly. And so the first commercial kitchen I was in, I connected with these other wonderful chefs and food vendors. And it turned out that one of them was building out a brand new commercial kitchen, which is where I am right now. And so about midway during that brick and mortar period, I had to move out of that kitchen in order to meet the demand. And so I was then just treating that little space as like a little retail pop up. And then after the year was up, it was clear that it just wasn't really going to work long term. And I moved all of my operation over to the commercial kitchen. So I think that's really important to maybe dig into because there's so much pivoting that happens in these, or at least for me, that's happened in these early months in the first few years. Sometimes things are not in your control and you have to be flexible enough to adjust and also be focused enough to not lose the thread. You know what I mean? So, so now everything's done here and then we're all pop-ups. People can walk in and buy pies from me, although that may be changing again for the holidays because it's a little too hectic. Anyway.
Well, so that's my next question is how do people buy from you? Is it like online ordering? Do they come to the commercial kitchen you operate out of? Are you strictly on pop-ups and, farmers markets? How does that work?
It's kind of all of the above, actually.
Okay.
And I think, one cool thing is that having that little retail space for a year allowed me to develop a loyal client base. I have, I think once looked at the numbers. I think almost half of my customers are returning customers. And many of them, just follow me to wherever, whatever pop-up I'm going to be at, or they come here to the kitchen. And also now they contact me through the website or Instagram, or in some cases they have my cell phone and they'll say, hey, what do you have available and can I come? And so we'll do pre-orders that way. For the holidays, we are about to launch our website. I mean, not our website. We have our website, but we're about to launch the landing pages so that people can pre-order. I'm getting ahead of that this year because last year was crazy and we waited a little too late to start taking pre-orders, but we're going to start doing that now. So, I think I've been open to trying lots of different things. And in that, I've figured out which things really don't work for me. And it's, part of the journey, I think.
So is this strictly a local business, or can you sell and package and ship a pie? Do
Mm-hmm.
people come and pick it up from you? How does that work?
People do pick up pies from me. I am not shipping yet, but I've had a lot of people ask me about that. I've started to play with it, but it's quite expensive and I don't have the bandwidth right now to make that happen. So I'm really trying to focus on the wholesale relationships that I currently have with some smaller gourmet grocery stores. Catering, I've done weddings. I just this past week at an event at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. So, we're doing lots of different kinds of things. And I also had recently a really great opportunity with a big national grocery store asked me for samples. So I shipped samples and I've pitched some ways in which maybe I could start working with them and scaling up. But, those things take a lot of time and they take investment and money. And so sometimes the timing is really the most important thing to consider.
Definitely. What's the shelf life on a pie? Like for these pop-ups, or if you're pre-ordering, do people got to come and get them on Saturday and make sure they're eaten by Sunday, or what is that
No,
like?
not really, actually. The fruit pies, especially, are really great because they're shelf stable for about 3 to 4 days, and you can keep them in the fridge, and you can also freeze them. So our key lime pie, which is a custard-based pie, is actually it's such a great pie because it's not only delicious, but it's a pie that you can keep in the freezer and actually eat straight out of the freezer. My sons do that. So that will stay in the freezer for a couple of months and you just have to make sure you wrap it and, keep it fresh that way.
Okay, so you said you're in a commercial kitchen. I guess for those who aren't perfectly familiar, myself included, is a commercial kitchen, is that kind of like a co-working space, but for cooking?
Kind
Like, is it
of.
just a huge kitchen that you share with other small businesses or restaurants, or how does that work?
So a commercial kitchen in and of itself is a kitchen that is a fully licensed facility by the health department and, has all of the commercial equipment that allows for mass production of whatever the food is. A commissary kitchen is a shared kitchen, a shared commercial kitchen. Sometimes people call them ghost kitchens also. And those are kitchens where the food vendors they may not have a storefront, but they have sort of a virtual storefront. So you might order online and then pick up or work through DoorDash to do that very thing. We've tried different things, but I call us a working bakery so that, we're here working, we're producing every day and customers can walk in and they can also order online ahead of time, which is very helpful. And hopefully people are coming out to the pop-ups and, following us on Instagram and figuring out where we are and getting their pies that way.
So what's your team like to date? It's not just you anymore, or do you have a team, or how does that look?
It's ebbed and flowed over the year and a half. In the beginning, I had a few more people helping out. I had more cash then. But that's, something that you have to consider. Labor is probably my biggest cost. And it's very challenging when sales are low to keep staff because, it's just very expensive. Right now, I have one part-time person, but we're going to start ramping up because of the holidays. And last year I had 4 people working, not full time. Everyone's kind of working, maybe 10 to 20 hours. So I'm able to cobble together, maybe a full time and a half person, if that makes sense. And then I'm doing everything too. So I'm baking, I'm doing social media, I'm, developing business relationships and collaborating with other small business owners, applying for grants, managing the money, ordering the ingredients. It's pretty consuming.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the ingredients. I want to talk about how you operate or systematize what you do in order to have ingredients on hand. I imagine it has to be based on order volume, finding suppliers. How does that work in your business?
There's a lot of experimenting, with that because it just sort of depends on the capital that I have available. So there are times when, I might pick a vendor. I know if I order larger quantities, it's going to be less expensive. Other times I'm going to pick a vendor because I know what the quality of the product is. And every time I order from that vendor, it's, I know what I'm getting. I do. One of the advantages of being in a commissary kitchen is being able to connect with my colleagues here and ask them, what's working for you? What vendor are you using for, your boxes, or what vendor are you using for your brisket, whatever it is. So that's been very helpful. And, there are times when I have to go to a grocery store myself because I've run out of something and, get whatever it is. But I really, we try and do our best to get, the best ingredients for the budget that we have. So we always have, we use fresh fruit. We use quick frozen fruit sometimes, but it's whole fruit. We don't use fillings that have been prepared ahead of time by someone else or anything like that. Everything is handmade, homemade.
Love it. Okay. How did you, or how did you, especially in starting out, when it comes to pricing, how did you figure out what to sell for? Was there a certain kind of market rate, or was it based on pies you can get at the grocery store? How did you land on your pricing systems?
Well, I did some research. I looked at what other small, artisanal pie companies around the country are doing. I looked for pie companies or pie shops in urban areas like in Austin and in Los Angeles, New York, places that have similar demographics to the Washington, D.C. suburban area. And I looked at, there were a couple of pie companies, or there was one pie company that I think may have gone out of business during the pandemic. And I looked at their menus, and that's how I landed on my current price point. Our pies are more expensive than grocery store pies, but it takes so much more to make them. I mean, all of our dough is made with butter only. We don't use oils or any preservatives in the crust. We, as I said before, make everything in small batches. So my assistant is here right now making, several batches of dough that we'll use just for this week to make the pies that we're making this weekend for different pop-ups and events that we have. Arriving at the price point, I did the research that I thought I should do to make that determination. And then I tried to kind of figure out, what the cost of the various ingredients were at that time when I started. And, things have gone up. Eggs have gotten more expensive. Butter's more expensive. And so the margins have tightened, and it's a challenge. And we're hoping that, I think part of the goal right now is to really remain sustainable until things stabilize in our economy and, we can kind of get through some of the external things that are happening right now that are impacting a lot of
Absolutely.
us food businesses.
Definitely. What's kind of the volume you handle? Is it more so, do you have a lot of one-off orders every day or every week? Or is it more so, do you need to schedule yourself an event every weekend? How does that operate?
Well, with the shift away from the retail space and being in a bit of a warehouse district, I'm not going to have the foot traffic that I might have had at the other space. And so because of that, I really do rely on the pop-up events and the catering orders right now more than individual walk-ins. The walk-ins still come, but it's definitely not as robust as it was at the shop. So yes, definitely scheduling pop-ups. I do a lot of networking with other small businesses. I was just invited yesterday to participate in an all-women's small business pop-up event. And I think having a social media presence is really important for that because you get to meet other businesses who are similarly situated or have, share your values in terms of community and community building and things like that.
What are the biggest seasons for your business? I understand the holidays are probably, I'm going to guess your biggest one, but is there other major seasons that you have to contend with or you get
Yeah,
to contend with?
yeah, definitely. I mean, the fall for sure, obviously, Thanksgiving and Christmas and other end of the year holidays, but Pi Day is a big one in March. And
Nice.
also Valentine's Day. Believe it or not, I think that we really look at. So, I don't know if you've seen the pies on the website, but
Hmm.
we have hearts on all of our pies. And they really have this handmade artisanal feel and look and taste. But the hearts are really, I think, what make they have that. If it were a house, they would. That's the curb appeal for the
Yeah.
pies. But anyway, so Valentine's Day is a natural fit.
Okay. What about the product line? Is it all key lime pie? How many different varieties do you have? Is there a benefit to having multiple or a certain number versus, I don't know, X amount of options versus X less amount of options?
So I always have certain things in in the production cycle. Always key lime pie, always some of the classics like apple pie, some sort of berry pie. In the fall, we'll always have pumpkin and often have sweet potato pies. It sort of depends on the season. I really like to play with, whatever's kind of in season. So cherry pies in the summer. We've been making strawberry rhubarb pies at the beginning of the summer, and peach pies, all the things that you think about when you think about summer. And then one of the things I love, for me, this is less about pie making and more about having a creative outlet, I think. Sometimes people will say to me, it's just so amazing that you're following your passion. You're making, you're baking, you're making pies. But it's really not about that. It's really about the creative work. And so that especially comes into play when I have time to experiment with flavors and recipes. So I like to play on my background, on my cultural heritage, and create recipes that celebrate that.
Do you guys do like delivery, or is it still all just total pickup?
It's
Type ordering.
mostly pickup, just because I don't have the bandwidth to do a lot of delivering. But I'll do it. It just kind of depends. One thing that I some time ago, I got a request from a neighbor I didn't know very well, who had a friend who was in hospice, and he had our pies before and asked her if she would get a key lime pie for him. And when she reached out with that story, I delivered that pie because that just was very compelling. So when I can, I do, but it's not something we do on the regular basis.
What's been the toughest part of owning this business, especially since you went full time with it?
It's a great question. I think that it's a lot more work than I could have imagined. When you're thinking about starting a business, that it's going to be a lot, but you really don't have any idea really what it's going to take until you're in it. And I think, if I were talking to myself before launching, I would just say, be prepared, because it's going to require a lot of energy. You have to be even physically strong enough to do the work. It's especially working in a kitchen, making sure that you are taking care of yourself and eating well and resting and exercising, because the work requires a lot of you physically, emotionally, psychologically. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is staying in balance with all of those things.
Absolutely. Tell me about your marketing. You've mentioned social media a couple times. What all do you do besides just organic social media? And I've heard you say networking with other businesses in the area. What do you do in terms of marketing to continue to grow the business?
Well, I don't have a specific marketing budget. I haven't had one really. So it's all happened very organically, definitely word of mouth. I try to be mindful of marketing at the pop-ups and, let people know that we're taking pre-orders for the holidays, for example. But the social media piece, Instagram, mostly Facebook. I tried TikTok. I don't love that platform, but I really like to think about the marketing on social media as an opportunity to tell stories. These are not just advertisements for the pies, but I approach it, I think, as a way of storytelling, telling these stories about community connection, making art. Yeah. So that, for me, that's what the social media piece is about mostly.
Okay. And then when it comes to, the process when you're actually at like a pop-up making sales, do you do anything extra when someone is there and purchases a pie? Do you have special packaging? Is there a lot that goes into creating the packaging? What kind of other things do you guys do at the point of sale to encourage more repeat buyers, besides the fact that your pies are amazing, they're going to love them, they're going to want more?
To be honest with you, I think it's less about packaging and more about the customer service and, connecting with the customers. And when I had the shop, people would come and hang out and we'd talk, and there was a lot of laughing and, silliness. And I think that's the magic. It's not the brand. It is the branding because that's part of the brand, but it's not necessarily how you package the pies as much as it's how you make yourself available, to your customers when they approach you. And that's something that I look for when I have someone working for me too. How friendly is this person? How comfortable are they striking up a conversation with someone they don't know? Those are qualities I look for in my team.
What about customer service? In my mind, hopefully seems fairly easy where someone comes in, they buy your pie, they love it, they buy more. But have there been anything in terms of customer service that you didn't see coming or that you fully expected and you learned how to handle with this business?
Do you mean like a complaint or something like that?
Yeah, if someone has a complaint or even if they have a request, I could see it being really easy to have shiny object syndrome when, oh, this key lime pie was amazing, but have you considered this kind of pie?
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of requests like that?
Sometimes not a ton. I mean, occasionally people will ask me whether I can make a pie that's sugar-free. And I have done that. I will do that if I have the time for that customer. I have a couple of regular customers who request that. I guess one of the things that I sometimes encounter are people who are a little bit, they're not that psyched about the price of the. So a 9-inch pie, for example, is $36. It's about 6 to 8 servings, depending upon how you slice the pie. A smaller 6-inch pie is going to be around $18. And, that's really what I need to charge in order to cover the overhead. I don't think a lot of people realize how expensive it is to have a food business. The rent, the licenses, all of the things that we're talking about, I don't even have a budget for marketing. I guess I could charge more and maybe do a little more efficiently, but, I also don't want to turn people away. I want everyone to be able to afford some of my products, any of the products, So if you can't afford a $36 pie, maybe you can have an empanada that's $7, So we do try to have a range of things available so that people can purchase them and can afford to have them.
Did you say you now have online ordering capabilities?
We do. I'm in the process of working on the website now to start taking pre-orders for the holidays, but it's not quite live yet. It'll be live. It'll be
Okay.
live by the end of the week.
All right, very cool. Walk me through the process. Did you do it yourself? Did you work with someone? What were some of the considerations you had to take into account when building out this part of your website?
So Brien, I've done all of it myself. So I
Wow.
did the
Okay.
website. I do the website. I manage the website. And I'm going to spend hours today and tomorrow, loading up and getting the descriptions for all the different pies that we're going to have available for pre-order for the holidays. It takes a lot of time. And, I think it's just something that has to be done right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially as a new business owner, you have to wear many hats. That's just part of the game. If it's not a business where you have venture capital or, capital behind it
Right.
or a lot of it behind it to hire out a lot of positions, you're going to wear hats. And that's entrepreneurship, especially when you're starting out.
Yeah.
So you're not unlike the majority of entrepreneurs when it comes to getting a business off the
Yeah.
ground. What do you see as the future for your business? I guess, what are your business goals in terms of growth? Are you looking to get towards a position where you can maintain it and you have maybe able to buy yourself back a little bit of your own time so you can focus on the business things as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to in it? Or do you have like massive growth goals where Dini's Divine Pies are going to be shipping national and going crazy?
I think that's a great question. And I think the honest answer is that I'm not exactly sure yet because a part of me wants to continue to build a regional brand, something that's locally based, something that, will always retain its artisanal, uh, locally made feel, And when I was on that other podcast on how I built this advice line, we talked about that, about how do you scale up when the heart and soul of your brand is really about locally made and made in small batches. And their advice to me was to maybe you don't have to scale up. All of these businesses think that scaling up is the goal, but maybe that's not really it. Maybe you become a destination brand, And then on the other hand, wow, wouldn't it be cool if this were a part of a movement where you can scale up something beautiful and homemade and homespun and something artistic, why can't we scale that up? Why can't we train people to be artists when they go into a commercial kitchen? And so that it's less about being a factory worker on a line and more about giving people who work for you something really joyful to do. And I do think that is scalable. I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but because I still, I'm still at the stage where I've got to make myself here with this company. I've got to really get it solid before I can start thinking about those loftier things. But I do think, why not? Why can't we do that? Why do we have this mindset that when you scale up, you lose quality? I don't think I don't think we have to think that way.
What are some of the requirements or things that someone considering opening a business with as it pertains to food? What do they have to take into account besides the basics of getting an LLC and business license, things like that? More so like with a health department or FDA or whatever. What are the types of things that you had to handle before you could open your food-based business?
Well, like I said before, I in my jurisdiction, you're required to take a test, an exam, and about food handling and allergies and allergens, and you have to get those certifications before you're able to open. I think that those things are fairly cut and dried. I mean, it takes a little bit of research, but that information is usually available online at your county health department website. But I guess what I think about is how food, when you're feeding people, that's a really intimate act, And so there's this, for me, a huge level of responsibility that comes with that. I feel like it might be a little different than if I were making jewelry or, something that people might be wearing. But people are putting these pies into their bodies. So I
Hmm.
care about that. I want, not only do I want it to taste good, but I want it to be, safe and healthy and something made with, just great ingredients and with a lot of care. I guess that's what I'm saying. So I think, if there's anyone out there who's thinking about starting a food business, to me, I think we have to lead with that because it's a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, Dini, this has been awesome. Such a cool little business that you've spun up and are making successful. I want to make sure that anybody out there listening today, if they want to learn more about you or your business, what's the best ways to check you out or kind of connect with you?
So definitely on Instagram. The handle is at Dini's Divine Pies. And my website is dinisdivinepies.com. There's a way for people to connect through the website. And so that's all fairly straightforward. But yeah, I'd love
All
to hear
right.
from people. I've reached out and asked others questions, and I'm always, to the extent that I have the time, I'm happy to share, information if I have it. I've had people reach out to me to ask me questions, and I try to make myself available. I think that's really important to, pay it forward. So happy to do that.
Absolutely. I love that. Awesome. Well, Dini, thank you so much for stopping
Thank
by and
you.
sharing your time and knowledge with us. And we wish you nothing but the best throughout the rest of this year and beyond.
Thank you, Brien. I really appreciate being here.